Good morning, everyone. Today I will be discussing with you Lenin's book, that is The State and Revolution. Okay, The State and Revolution. So, before we begin, let me uh, uh, introduce to you this text of Lenin, where he actually tried to explain to us the whole idea of the state as propagated by Karl Marx and Engels, and of course tried Lenin in this particular text. He tried to bring about the unity of theory and practice in the application of knowledge about the state, especially in the context of the workers' revolution. So, at the very outset, uh, let us begin by saying that this particular text, The State and Revolution, was written by Lenin in the summer of 1917, in the context of in the context of the Russian Revolution. Of course, Lenin was still under hiding when he wrote this text, and in the postscript, Lenin also explained to us that this text is an incomplete text, and he had taken a break to write this particular volume or this particular text, and probably it will take long time for him to be able to come back to finish this particular manuscript or text, because he has to go back into the into activism, or he has to go back and engage himself in the affairs of the Russian Revolution. So, so the question is, why did Lenin why did Lenin take a break to write this book? Lenin was concerned with the question of the state, and to explain the question of the state in a systematic way, Lenin felt was very important. Okay, it was very important, as well as it was necessary, particularly because by this time when Lenin had to come back to write this text, there was already the provisional government in Russia after the Tsar, after the Tsar was rid of. So, so therefore, Lenin, while explaining in the preface about this particular text, he said that this is a very significant study to understand the state, particularly to understand as to which class which class should hold power, or which class is capable or is necessary to actually hold power. So therefore, he says this is an urgent question and not necessarily an abstract idea. This is not an abstract idea, but an urgent question. So therefore, Lenin explained to us that the February Revolution, of course, did help the working class, especially in their attempt to get rid of the Tsar. But he says many issues remain pressing and not yet resolved. So the provisional government, although they have been put there by the people, but they were not. They refused to distribute land to the peasants, and people were taking matters in their own hands, and therefore this revolutionary movement carried on even after the February Revolution up to October 1917. So therefore, what Lenin says that the situation in Russia was much the same before the revolution and even after this particular revolution. So those who ran the provisional government, they dominated, or they dominated the government, and this provisional government was similarly was being dominated by those who wanted to build a capitalist state. Although the idea was, to get rid of this feudal state, and yet the state is now being built, or the state is now being dominated by people who again is trying to bring about a capitalist state. So he says revolution, the revolution had to be carried on. Um, uh, so therefore he says that what happened after this revolution, or what the revolution would do. Therefore they will create, it is able to create a revolutionary group which otherwise will not have any place in this particular nature of the state, and could therefore what this could do is this could not last, indefinitely. So this kind of situation will certainly not last indefinitely. One side will have to gain power. He says one side. So therefore, in this particular situation, certainly a certain group will gain power. And in the context of how this provisional government is being run, Lenin says that the capitalist power is coming back, and the revolutionary class, the revolutionary group of people will not have any place in the present nature of the state. So therefore, Lenin says that there are twists and turns. There are twists and turns during the revolution, and these twists and turns are actually in many ways the target against the revolutionary movements, and therefore Lenin's important question was, how could the revolution go forward? How could this revolution move forward? How these questions should be resolved and therefore taken forward, and how this question could be resolved in the interest of the working class, or in the interest of the mass population. So therefore, Lenin was concerned about the question of the revolution. Is it relevant to us? Is the question that Lenin asked, or is the question that Lenin was trying to deal with, especially in the context of the question of what is the state? So, therefore, if the revolution was irrelevant to the working class, therefore the next question would be, how to challenge the existing state, how to resolve questions within the state. How to resolve questions within the state. So, therefore, the first important task of Lenin, therefore, as somebody who understood Marxism, as somebody who has tried to incorporate Marxism into his revolutionary activity, was the attempt of bringing about a unity of theory and practice. Bringing about unity of theory and practice. So Lenin was, as I said, was faced by this question that goes back to Marx and Engels with regard to the coming about of the state, the existence of the state, and therefore in his attempt to understand this question of the state, he kept on referring to Karl Marx and angels. And therefore, if you see this particular text, if you go through this particular text, in almost every chapter, there are 6 chapters in this text. Every time Lenin goes back to Karl Marx and angels. In the first chapter itself, called The Class Society in a State, Lenin talked about the state as a product of the irreconcilability of class antagonism. The same thing that Karl Marx was talking about. And then he talked about the special armament, prisons, extra, or he talked about, the state apparatus as being the special bodies of armament. And he kept on saying that the state is an instrument for the exploitation of the oppressed class. And therefore, in this particular chapter, Lenin also talked about the withering away of the state and violent revolution, all referring to Karl Marx. Same thing is, in chapter 2, in chapter 3, 4, 5, 6, all through Lenin was constantly referring to Karl Marx and angels in trying to bring about unity of theory and practice. And he tries to contextualize these theory in his own revolution, that is the Russian Revolution. So as I said, therefore, throughout the book, Lenin was indulged in how theory of the state, from that of what Karl Marx and the angels wrote in the Communist Manifesto, where they talk about, talk of the workers uniting and, overthrowing the state, talking about the dictatorship of the proletariat, to the whole, transformation of that theory in the Paris Commune, where Karl Marx and angels try to explain that dictatorship of the proletariat need not necessarily mean the the violent revolution, but a transformation into a democratic process in which everyone is part and parcel of the state, and where everybody is participating in the democratic process of the state. So therefore, Lenin developed Marx's theory of the state further according to his own experience of the revolution. According to his own revolution of the revolution, particularly in Russia. So in State and Revolution, he kept referring to the revolution, and he says this is important. Referring to revolution as a counterproduct of the state, or as the antithesis of the state, is important, because Marx and Angel's theory were more of an intellectual underpinnings of ideas, and therefore for him, for Lenin, his concern was more about the application of this theory into practice. So what is that for? What is this? Why there is such a need? He says this will enable them to be guided in further practice. This will guide the revolution in their further practice. So similarly, Lenin says that in the State and Revolution, in his attempt to try to understand Marx's idea of the state, he is not going to be utopian in his approach, but he says we are not utopian, and my attempt is not necessarily to have a utopian explanation about the state. So therefore, systematically, Lenin tried to analyze the experiences of the working class struggle in order to understand how socialism came about out of capitalism. So therefore, in this particular text, Lenin analyzed the experience. He tried to see how the working class are actually the byproduct of that particular state which has been created because of class antagonism. So, therefore, he tried to explain in this particular in this particular text. He tried to explain how socialism, how socialism actually came about, or how socialism emerged out of the desire, the determination of the working class in the capitalist system. So, therefore, Lenin kept on insisting, that the context is important. The context of the state, the context of the revolution as the byproduct of the of the state which has been created because of class antagonism is important. So, so therefore, the revolution that was going on in the or rather in the revolution that was going on, Lenin tried to address the urging questions, the urging questions through this particular text, the state and revolution. So, so therefore, the existence of what Lenin called the opportunist was his concern. He was very concerned about what he called as the opportunist, because he says when the provisional government was being formed, these are the opportunists who became part of that provisional government, part of that provisional administration, and they called themselves revolutionaries and socialists. But in his view, Lenin argued that certainly they weren't, or they are not revolutionaries and they are not socialists. So he names them. He says the Mensheviks and the socialists and social revolutionaries, he says they are not revolutionaries as such, but they are the ones that are stopping the real revolution from achieving whatever goal was meant to be. So, so what is the meaning of this? What is meant? What is this? So he says that these revolutionaries, they are stopping the revolution from what it is meant for. So he named people like Kautsky and says that people like Kautsky are the ones who were distorting Marxism, because they participated in the provisional, in the provisional revolution, in the provisional state. He says these are the revolutionaries who have been vilified often in their own time, and what would happen to them is that after that, attempts were made to canonize them and to turn them into harmless icons by the state. Why is this happening? This is happening because the state is certainly, since it is a capitalist state, is certainly trying to lure the revolutionaries, and in the process of luring the revolutionaries, these intermediates, or you can say these middlemen who stand on the in between the real revolutionaries and the state, they are being tamed. They are being tamed, and therefore during when they were alive, of course the capitalist state would definitely vilify them, but after that they would canonize them, they would call them heroes. And in this process, what happened is, on the one side, the revolutionaries would be lured, and in the process, therefore, the capitalist state was indicating that it was determined to actually subdue the revolutionary movements. So, so therefore, Lenin kept on insisting that this is what is happening with Marxist teaching when it reaches such a group of people who are opportunist in nature. So therefore, he wanted to re-establish what actually Marx said about the whole question of the state and revolution. from an academic point of view, but more applying that academic knowledge into practice. So this is the major concern of Lenin in this particular text. So so therefore, now we come to what is what and what actually is the state. So if you again, if you go back to the text, as I said, the first chapter deals with the question of question of the class society and the state, and of course the experience of 1848 to 1851, and then the experience of the commune or Paris Commune of 1871, and how Marx actually analyzed this particular revolution that took place in Paris in 1871. So as I said, this so therefore in all this, the starting point of Lenin's argument is that the state is not neutral. The state is not neutral, and the working class therefore cannot take over the state, but they have to smash it. This is what Lenin says. They have to smash it. By smashing, it does not necessarily mean violently taking away the state. That is not what Lenin meant. We will explain that a little further. So therefore, taking from Marx and Engels' clear views, he says the working class cannot just take away the existing machinery of the state and use it for their own purposes. Use it for their own purposes. We have discussed this in imperialism. So therefore, for Lenin and his in his bolder statement, he said the state has to be smashed, it has to be dismantled, and the working class has to shatter. It has to break and shatter the existing state machinery. They have to find ways to undo the existing organs, the existing machineries of the state. So therefore, what is meant here is that you just don't revolt against the state, create a violent situation, but what Lenin is saying is you have to take over the machineries of the state, transform them into a democratic institution. So so therefore, shattering of the existing state machinery, not just take possession of it, is what Lenin says. So which means there are many aspects of the state, according to Lenin. If it has to transform itself from capitalist into socialist into communist state, then there are many things that the state has to transform itself. So so therefore, and this is because of the fact that the state is not neutral. The state is not neutral according to Lenin. So the state machineries, like what Lenin called, the special bodies of armament, like the army, the police, these have to be dismantled, or these have to be done away, because in the socialist state you may not need these instruments at all. So therefore, going back to Karl Marx, Lenin put this idea forward that the state, of course, is an organ of class rule. It has emerged because at some stage in the stage of history, the state has evolved into an economic condition, or the state has evolved itself in a way that the economic condition created the existence of class antagonism. So therefore, the state, which is an organ of state rule, is certainly also an organ of suppression of one class by another. And therefore, Lenin goes back to Karl Marx to say that the state is the product of class antagonism. The state is a product of class antagonism, and it arises because of class contradiction that cannot anymore be reconciled. It cannot, because two classes cannot reconcile with each other anymore, and these classes are the capitalists and the working class. So these are the two antagonistic classes. So in this particular context, Lenin says that the state is actually an instrument where minority are exploiting the vast majority, where the minority are exploiting the vast majority, and the state therefore is essential not for the mass majority but for the ruling class to fulfill their own their own interest. The state is essential to maintain the hegemony of the working class, and and Lenin says that is how it came about into being, and for that purpose the state is there to maintain that hegemony of the working class, or rather the capitalist class. So Engels further explained this. Then goes back to Engels. He says Engels himself has explained this when he said, Lenin says that Engels has explained this when Engels said that the state hasn't always been there. The state has not always been there in the society. Without there have been societies even without the state, and it came into being at a certain stage of economic development, bound by splits in the society into classes. So the state becomes a necessity. This is what Engels says. So I repeat again, Engels says that the state has not necessarily always been there, but the state came into existence at some stage of development. At some stage of economic development, when the society was split into classes because of the economic structure, and the state therefore became necessary from that point of time. So there have been society where the state did not exist before. So therefore Lenin, while talking about what Engels says, he further explained this in Engels' words, that it is the state of the most dominantly powerful class. So the state is what? An instrument of the dominantly powerful class. Who are these dominantly powerful class? These are the political, again dominantly powerful political class, or the political dominant class, and has the means to pull down and exploit the oppressed class. So these are the people who control the state, and this is, so the purpose of the state is to maintain this interest, or the interest of this particular class. So how does the state maintain the interest of a particular class? How does the state do this? So Lenin says there are a number of ways. First, maybe by making laws, that would ensure that the masses will not be able to revolt against the state, like we have seen in the case of the farmers today in the borders to Delhi. The state is using all the laws that is available to tell them that you should not proceed further, or using all the means, the state apparatus like the police, the army, even to the extent of digging away the road that they have made out of public money to ensure that the people do not come to the national capital. So Lenin says there are a number of ways in which the state actually maintain that dominance of the ruling class, by making laws, Then by ensuring that the economic structure is based on private property, so therefore though the property class will have access to the government, and the non-property class, the mass majority, will have nothing to do with the affairs of the state. Then of course whole network of institutions, as I said, from the police, the judiciary, the executive, the legislature, educational institution, healthcare institutions, all these network are there, to contain all the challenges that the state may face. If you have discussed Polanza and others, you would understand the relative autonomy of the state, where the state is not free. These people are actually controlling. So, so therefore, he says these institutions may look democratic, judges may look unbiased, top civil servants may look, executive in their performance, yet all these people are there for the purpose of serving the interest of one particular class, and that is the ruling class. But if Lenin says, after having used all these mechanisms, if these again fail, then if all these fail, then the ruling class use the law enforcing agencies or the law enforcing missionaries through coercion, to be able to maintain the interest of the working class. So therefore, the police, the army, prisons are what Lenin called as the special bodies of armament. He says these are the forces of the state to back up the laws, to maintain the order of class rule. To maintain the order of class rule. So, so therefore, in all this, Lenin was very clear that the standing army and the police are the chief instruments of state power, the chief instruments of states, of the hegemony of particular class, especially in the state. So, so therefore, Lenin kept on saying that the state is not separate from society. It is not neutral body for mediating between conflicting classes, but rather the state came into existence because it was created by one class to protect their own interests. So therefore the state is necessary only because this particular class thinks that the state is the way in which they can take control over the masses. So Lenin reasserted, he kept on reasserting this, because at the time of the revolution, there were those who were saying that yes, the state exists, while the state should exist, while revolution and class struggles should also go on. There are people who say that because the state exists, there should be criticism to the state, and therefore these two could coexist, and this is how the state can become better. Today also there are many theories that says that, for example, we need grassroots mobilization in the form of Maoist movement. They should, although they are anti-state, yet they could still exist simultaneously, because they are the one that critique the state. This kind of argument was there. And so therefore Lenin was very particular to explain to us what is the state for. The state is not necessarily going to transform itself into a perfect state. That is what Lenin is saying. Until and unless it is uprooted, it is dismantled through the changing of all these apparatus. So, so therefore, Lenin says that these people who try to correct Marx, to argue that the state can be an organ for reconciliation, or the state should be criticized in order to be able to reconcile with different classes, rather than the oppression of one class by another.